Tomorrow is an important day, a sad day in American history. 9/11, when terrorists brought down the Twin Towers in New York City and over 3,000 people were murdered. When that happened, the Sunday after that happened, churches were packed. People flocked to places where they could make some kind of connection with God, Christian churches and other kinds of places of worship as well. But after 3 weeks, everything was pretty much back to normal numbers-wise. Actually, there was an anti-religious surge that came about right after 9/11, and it may have had something to do with some books that were published by leading atheists. A man by the name of Sam Harris, he's an author, philosopher, and neuroscientist, wrote a book called The End of Faith, and he offered a scathing critique of religion. There were a lot of people who pushed back on that book. Actually, it spent 33 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, but he got a lot of criticism for that. And so he wrote another little booklet called Letter to a Christian Nation, in which he says, "You Christians are the problem." Richard Dawkins is an English ethologist. That's someone who studies animal behavior. He's also an evolutionary biologist and an author, and he wrote a book called The God Delusion. He said, if this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. And it sold over 3 million copies that were published in 35 different languages. Christopher Hitchens was a British author, a social critic, and a journalist, and he wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And he, too, attacks all religions. And he sold millions of copies of his book. Whether the drift away from religious thought is because of writings like this, or whether they are a reflection of what's going on in our country, there is no doubt that people in America are moving away from faith in any kind of a God, and in particular, they're moving away from Christian faith. There was a Pew Research Center study done in 2014 which found that overall 23% of our population say that they are not affiliated with any particular kind of religious belief. And there's an even greater percentage among those who are the millennials, those who are 18 to 29 years old. And the percentage of those non-affiliated religiously is climbing rapidly within that demographic. The majority of them are men who are just done with religion. And it isn't that atheism has necessarily become very attractive to people all of a sudden. It's more the case that people just aren't interested in religious things anymore. They aren't interested in what religion offers or what they perceive that religion offers. Or maybe they're just turned off for a variety of reasons. They're done. They're done with it. God doesn't seem necessary. He doesn't seem essential, and he certainly doesn't seem believable in the light of recent scientific discoveries. And so religion has lost its appeal, and people are migrating away from Christian faith. And it could be that there are people here today who are on the verge of stepping away from a faith that was once a part of your life. Maybe you're here because a friend invited you to be here, and you're someone who doesn't believe in God, or you're curious, at least, and so you've accepted the invitation and you're here. And I want to welcome you here and thank you for coming and being with us in a place that might be a little weird, a little awkward, singing songs you've never heard, doing things that seem strange. Thank you for tolerating all of that. And this is going to be a very respectful discussion today. Nobody is going to be disparaged because of where they are in their understanding of things. But we want to have a clear understanding of things as we begin this discussion, because before we throw ourselves into faith or lack of faith in atheism, or throw ourselves into a dedication to following Christ, we need to understand the implications of both of those approaches to life, so that we're either stepping into or stepping away from something that is accurate. Everybody believes something about the nature of reality. Study of reality is called metaphysics. For atheists like Harris and Dawkins and Hitchens, atheism is a very complex belief system that's very centered in the natural world. And they appeal to scientific thought to come to the conclusions that they draw. And don't misunderstand this to be some kind of a stepping away from scientific thought or saying that science is the enemy of faith in God. It certainly isn't. Science offers the wonderful description of the world that we live in. We understand it so much better because of advances in science, and our quality of life is so much better. So where the differences come between people who are atheistic and naturalistic and those who are believers in God is how we interpret the data. When we look at what's going on around us and the world around us, how do we understand that? And how are the conclusions drawn? And so, I want to look at, for those of us who are followers of Christ, I want to look at what are the conclusions that atheists draw, or at least some atheists draw, that are their foundational faith. And we're going to look at 6 tenets of atheism. And these aren't things that Christians have generalized about what they think about atheism. These come from the thoughts and the writings and the statements of leading atheists themselves. And the first one is this: if there is no God, if there is no non-physical spiritual realm beyond the physical, if everything is natural, if it's only the physical world around us that is real, then there is no you. The idea of a mind, a human mind, is merely an illusion. The personality that you know as you doesn't really exist. It isn't I think, therefore I am. It is I think because of neurons in my brain reacting to stimuli. Personal consciousness and self-awareness are illusions. Christopher Hitchens, in his book Mortality, chronicled his progress toward death. He was dying of esophageal cancer, and he passed away in 2011. And so this book is a journal of a dying atheist. And his doctor kept talking to him about his body, your body this, your body that. And finally, he stopped the doctor and he said, I don't have a body. I am a body. This is who I am. This is what I am. Because if life is just biology, then there is no you that exists over and apart from your body. Now, there is no doubt that the body affects the mind. I saw this happen with my parents. As they aged, things happened chemically, physically within them that limited how they were able to think and even changed their personality to some extent. One of the saddest things that I've ever observed or been a part of. So definitely, we are tied up within the physical processes of our brains. But it's also true that our mind affects our body. You can think about certain things in a certain way that can make you sick. If you worry too much, have great anxiety over something, it can raise your blood pressure. You can develop a migraine headache because of that. Your mind can trick your body into getting well when you're sick. If you're given a placebo, and if your mind thinks that this is actual medicine, it's proven that you can get well. Your brain or your mind acted on your body. If you tell a lie, they can hook electrodes up to you, and they can tell physically what's going on with your mind as to whether you're telling the truth or not. They can track in your brain where certain emotions come from, and where the analytical, calculating side of us comes from in the prefrontal cortex or the different regions of the brain. Yes, they can analyze that, but there's one thing that they can't do physically. They can't determine what it is that you are thinking at any given moment. That's very private. It's very personal. And it's physically and scientifically inaccessible because that is you and that is me. And there are times when I can't stand to look in the mirror, not for the reason you might think. It's because when I look at myself, and if I stand there and stare into my eyes for very long, I'm looking at the person who knows me better than anybody else in this world knows me. I'm looking at the person who really knows me. And it freaks me out. And I have to look away. As followers of Christ, what I'm going to do is present the tenet of atheism and then lay up alongside that what we believe as followers of Christ. Not in a debate sort of a form, but just so you know what the two alternatives are, so we accurately understand both sides, what we're choosing or what we're stepping away from. And so as followers of Christ, there is a book that we see as being authoritative. We call it the Bible, the Scriptures. And certainly, as God speaks to us through those printed pages, we understand that we have a mind, we have a spirit, we have a soul that stands apart from our human physical bodies. They're interrelated. They are affected by one another. And we have to pay attention to both. But we are bodies that are separate from our soul and spirit. Jesus said, "Do not fear those who can harm your body, but fear the one who is in command of your soul. And pity the one who provides only for the body, but does not make preparation or provision for the soul, because they are two different things, headed for two different places. At conception, body and soul come together, but at death, my body goes to the ground, but my soul lives on. And such is my faith in Christ." The second tenet of atheism is that not only is the understanding of you an illusion, but free will is an illusion. Everything that we think, say, and do is determined because free will cannot exist in a universe that is driven purely by physics. Stephen Hawking, who is regarded as the next great mind, the second coming of Albert Einstein in his brilliance, he says it's hard to imagine how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical law, and that is what he believes and teaches. So it seems that we are no more than biological machines and that free will is just an illusion. We're just dogs who see squirrels, and we can't help ourselves. If there is no free will, it is still very difficult for us to embrace that and to live that way. And even Stephen Hawking says, "I have noticed that even people who claim that everything is predestined, that we have no control over what we say or do, or what's going to happen," he says, "I have noticed that even so, people who believe that look before they cross the road, just to be safe." Every so often we bump into something that, whether it's true or not, we find it unlivable. And living in the absence of free will, we simply can't function that way. Whether we believe in God or not, we all function as if we can direct our own lives, as if our decisions matter. And we continue to wrestle over and ponder our decisions as if they make a difference, because it's obvious to us that they do make a difference. And as followers of Christ, that is our understanding. The Scriptures speak constantly of our ability to command our thoughts, to be in control of our thoughts and our decisions, because they have great effect on us. We're told to take every thought captive. Don't just let anything pass in and out of our minds freely, but to be responsible for those. We are called to proactively think about the good things and the right things in life. Jesus said, especially when it comes to thinking the wrong things, immoral things, that as we do that, it is one and the same with committing that act physically. And we need to be careful not to do that. We are held accountable for our thoughts and decisions. We are not powerless automatons. We are not organic cyborgs. Choose this day whom you will serve, the Scriptures say. Is it going to be God or something else or someone else, or are we going to serve ourselves? But the choice has to be made. And we've seen a wonderful example of a young man and a young woman today who chose to serve Christ. And that's a decision that was made of driving a stake in the ground and saying, from now on, I'm with God and He's with me. And that wasn't an illusion. That was a very real decision that they made today. There's the illusion of value. There's the illusion of personality. There's the illusion of free will, and then the illusion of value, if we hold that there is no God. We always speak of value or no value, something that's good or bad, something that's right or wrong. But that isn't plausible in a world that's governed by physics. There can only be declared value, something that I say that's valuable, but nothing that has inherent value in a predetermined way of living. Animals experience no kind of value in the way that they function. It's pure instinct. So it only follows that if we are mere animals, then the same rules of logic apply. An intangible, non-physical rule of thumb like value cannot exist in a purely physical world. You know, people will comfortably say at times in a discussion of truth, well, I have my truth and you have yours, and we can both be equally true, which logically doesn't make sense if your truth is a contradiction of my truth. But people will say that, and they're okay with that. But they stop short when somebody might say, well, you have your justice and I have mine, and they're both equally valid. You know, I might say, it's okay to kill people because of their ethnicity. And you might say, well, you know, I don't agree with that, but you have your justice and I have mine, and I think we can comfortably coexist with each other in that. No thinking person agrees with that, whether they're an atheist or a follower of Christ. Nobody agrees with that. But how do you make the case in a natural world that there is such an intangible thing as value or justice, much less your justice being more valid than my justice? Based on what? What kind of arbiter for justice can you appeal to in a world of physics and only physics? And of course, as followers of Christ, I don't think I need to belabor this point, but we appeal to what we understand to be a higher authority, an outside authority for what is right, what is wrong, what is good and bad, what is ethical, what is moral, and what is just. We appeal to Jesus Christ, the one that we understand to be God, who came to earth, who is the final word on such things, who came from another world to give us an understanding of what is good and bad and right and wrong. The fourth tenet of atheism: if there is no God, that means that something came from nothing without any help from an intelligent being. Have you ever tried to imagine or conceive of nothing? I mean, absolutely nothing. No quarks, no neurons, no electrons, no nothing. That's one of those other things that makes my head feel funny when I sit and think about it for a while. So how did something come out of nothing? What happened before the Big Bang? Most leading scientists and atheists agree that there was a time when there was nothing, that this universe hasn't always existed. It isn't pre-existent. So where did it come from? And in their honesty, they say, we don't know. We don't have the answer to that. Richard Dawkins says cosmology is waiting on its Darwin. And he believes that science will someday have the answer to that question. How do you get something out of nothing? Richard Dawkins and John Lennox were in a debate. John Lennox is a professor at Oxford University. He teaches mathematics and a very dynamic follower of Christ. And so Dawkins usually doesn't debate Christians, but he chose to debate John Lennox. And those who were watching the debate said, John Lennox is very intriguing, but he's a very jolly-looking man. I don't know if I have a picture of him up here or not. I guess I don't. Very jolly-looking, big smile, very, very friendly. They said it was like Satan debating Santa Claus. They weren't sure why Dawkins wanted to take him on. But in this debate, Richard Dawkins asked Lennox, he said, you say God created you. Well, who created God? Of course, as Christians, we understand, we believe and teach that God is pre-existent. God has always been. But Lennox turned the question around on Dawkins and said, well, you say the universe created you, and who created the universe? Something, someone, somewhere had to be the first cause, had to be that initial catalyst to bring something out of nothing. Was it blind chance? Or did a creative mind have something to do with that? All things not only came into existence, but they came into existence with amazing precision. Stephen Hawking talks about what an amazing thing is that matter exists in the first place. He says, hang with me here, he says if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 100,000 millionth of 1 second after the Big Bang, the universe would have either collapsed back on itself or would never have developed galaxies. There's no margin for error in the forces that came together that brought matter into existence. And far more complex is the forces that had to come together in order for life to exist and to be sustained as we know it here on planet Earth. A skeptic once said, if God would write across the sky, "Hey, Roger, here I am," he says, then I would believe. Roger, I'm not talking about you. Well, God has written across his universe much more explicitly than anything like that. You know, the recent eclipse, I bet just about everybody in here knows that there was an eclipse. And many of you bought the glasses and you saw it. And we stood there in wonder of such an amazing thing. The moon perfectly blocked out the sun. Does that prove the existence of God? No. But it makes us curious, doesn't it, about the precision of that. The moon, and I may stumble here as I describe this, but the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, so it can't block out the sun. But the sun is at a distance 400 times greater than the moon is from us, and the proportions are exactly right for an eclipse to happen. Why is that? Was God just messing with us? Having some fun on the day that he created all that? He says, I'll give him something to think about here. You know, there were people who wrote in concerned about their pets. You know, should I get glasses for my dog? And this very kind person wrote back and said, dogs don't tend to look at such things as that. But as human beings, we sure did, didn't we? We gathered all over the world, or at least in the path of the eclipse, and we pondered and we thought and we were amazed, and people were emotionally moved, whether they were spiritual people or not. People were weeping at the sight of this, thinking, what does it all mean? Isn't it majestic? Isn't it incredible? And the cows just kept chewing their cud in the field and never looked up. How is it that we, of all the creatures here on earth, how is it that we are the only ones that looked up in astonishment? Well, as followers of Christ, we understand that that is the handprint of someone quite intelligent who brought all things into being. And it's described eloquently and poetically in the 19th Psalm. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. God is far more eloquent than, hey, Roger, here I am. The fifth tenet of atheism is that first life emerged from no life with no help. Even if we can figure out how something came out of nothing, then how did the spark of life then explode out of that original matter? Francis Crick and James Watson, together with Maurice Wilkins, received the Nobel Prize in 1962 for their discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. They discovered that back in 1953. Crick is an avowed atheist, but even he says, an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. So how does someone who doesn't believe in God, how do they explain the miracle of the original spark of life? Well, there is a theory that is posited that is known as panspermia, which says that life is pervasive throughout the universe, that this isn't the only place in the galaxies where life occurs, and so somehow life out there in the beyond was carried to this world, and there was enough organic matter present for life to become a reality, to spring into existence. Kind of like the Asian horned beetle that came to the United States in a packing crate. They say maybe there was an asteroid that was infected with life that crashed into the surface of the planet and life became a reality. Well, Francis Crick goes one step further. He posits the theory of directed panspermia. What that means is that possibly there are aliens, there are advanced life forms who came to this planet in spaceships and sowed the seed of life. And here we are because of that. And he thinks that's entirely plausible. Along with that question that has to be asked, where did first life come from? How did that first life then develop and grow in its complexity to end up as someone like me with these very complicated strands of DNA that are a part of my makeup? How did it go from simplicity to complexity? Well, the answer to that, according to atheists, to some atheists, is evolution. Survival of the fittest. Natural selection. Richard Dawkins says this about the wonder of evolutionary theory, although he doesn't call it theory. He says, speaking of Charles Darwin's breakthrough, he says, think about it. On one planet, and he's talking about Earth, on one planet and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing, and eating other such animated chunks of complexity, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. I would love to see his Valentine card to his wife. You wonderful chunk of complex matter, you. He says, we now understand essentially how the trick is done, which flies in the face of one of the basic understandings of science, is that things in the natural world do not move from simplicity to complexity. It's known as entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, unless there is some kind of outside force to counteract that. A fine house will finally crumble into a pile of bricks, but we don't see a pile of bricks form themselves up into a fine house unless somebody is there, some intelligent being with force is able to make that happen. And what holds true in inanimate objects would hold just as true in the organic world. And of course, the alternative to that I understand as a follower of Christ, is that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. There was nothing. And this great creative mind called matter into existence out of nothing. God spoke, and it was. And God made living creatures of tremendous variety. And the crowning, final coup de grace of his creative purpose was to bring us, men and women, into existence. Men and women who carry his image within themselves. People who can comprehend, people who are self-aware, people who can look to the skies and understand the God who has made them. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that speaks of Jesus Christ, who was God and is God, who was God expressing himself in human terms, and without him was not anything made that was made. And such is my faith. Well, there you have the 6 tenets of atheism and the alternate understandings that come from a belief in Christ. And so we can evaluate those honestly and see what we think. There are many scientifically accomplished people who are on the same intellectual level as Harris and Dawkins and Hitchens and Hawking, who believe in God and who are followers of Christ, and you can take comfort in that. There are some books that I would recommend that you read along with your Bible to get a full understanding of faith. But here it comes. Frank Turek has written a book called Stealing from God. It's a book I'm reading right now. The Reason for God, one of the best books on Christian apologetics I've ever read, by Timothy Keller, who is a pastor in New York City. And then I haven't read this book, but I've watched this guy on YouTube. This is Santa Claus. This is John Lennox that I referenced. Listen to him on YouTube. Fascinating. Brilliant man, brilliant mind. A very firm believer in God and dedicated follower of Jesus Christ. Frank Turek has put up a list of what he considers to be the 20 greatest minds in the field of Christian apologetics, people who have influenced him greatly. And if you want to take out your phone and take a picture of this next slide, you can. Check out these websites. These are people who have not kissed their brains goodbye and find it very credible and very harmonious to look at the world of science and the discoveries of science and the revelation of God in the Scriptures, and they find those two coming together in a very beautiful way. So I would encourage you to check those out. So you may find yourself in the camp of atheism, and you embrace these 6 tenets that we've talked about today. But if you are a skeptic, and you have no need, you feel like you have no need for God or no time for God, it may have nothing to do with anything that I've just talked about for 20 or 25 minutes. It may be something that's on much more of a feeling level with you than it is of a scientific kind of an examination. It could be that somewhere in the past you've been disappointed by spiritual people. Maybe you were in a church where you got hurt by something that happened, something that said, really something that had nothing to do with Jesus, but was hurtful all the same. And I'm sorry that that happened. And I'm sorry that Christ was misrepresented to you in that way. And maybe in the next few weeks we can do a better representation of Christ, maybe than what you've seen so far. But we have to come to terms with, what if it is all an illusion? What if the atheists are right? What if there is no value, no justice, because there is no mind, and there is no you, and there's no anybody else? What if we are automatons, primates with a DNA that's just a little bit more advanced than that of other primates? And we're just moving about in a purely physical world, hoping that we can win the battle of the survival of the fittest, and then we die, and it's over. Deep down, many people, and maybe most people, hope for better than that. And there might be something inside of you that hopes that there is more, and that we are more than just animals who are one and done in this life. I will freely admit that I can't live without God. I cannot come to terms with that. I am hopelessly biased in favor of my faith in Christ. And intellectually, that works for me. But I will freely admit that I need God. I need the hope that He gives. And I'm very grateful that I have found that hope in the person of Jesus Christ. In this one who is otherworldly, who came and expressed God in the most explicit terms to us. And I have thrown in with Him completely and totally. And I have a good understanding of life and what my purpose is and why I'm here and where I'm going because of that faith. And I hope that if that's something that you're pondering, that's something that's foreign to you, that over the next few weeks, if you stick with this and you hang in, whether you continue to come here or listen on YouTube to the sermons that will be presented, I pray that you'll give God a chance to show you what that hope is all about. It's a wonderful thing.